What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at Manchester City's thrilling comeback against Aston Villa to win them the Premier League title on the final day, with Liverpool winning their game against Wolves, so making it so Manchester City had to win, and they did on the last day. Now, before we get into it, check out the OneFootball app in the description below. It's the first link. They're sponsoring today's video, and they've been sponsoring the channel for the past 2 months or so, and they've been a huge support. So if you download the app, it would mean a whole lot to the channel. And that's me on your screen using the app, scrolling through. It's a quality app, and it's the best for all things football. Now we're moving into the summer transfer window, and it has all the up-to-date news on all your favorite players. So be sure to download that. And again, that's in the description below. And while you're in the description, check out both my books and check out Keyframe. All that's in the description. Now let's get right into the video. Now we're going to start with Manchester City in possession of the ball, because this was the dominant phase throughout the match. They went with a clear back four, especially to start, with Fernandinho starting as the central defender and John Stones playing as a right fullback. Now, the biggest tendency for this match was City in possession of the ball and their midfield fluidity to then change structure and create different types of spaces. Now, the biggest threat was from Aston Villa, when they would then play very direct, typically going straight in behind against the two central defenders of Manchester City. And when Manchester City would make mistakes in their rest defense, that's when Aston Villa looked most dangerous. But going forward, they had a lot of different options on how they could use their midfield to then create space in dangerous areas. So we see their starting structure of a 4-3-3. I often saw Phil Foden on this left-hand side inverting, and Cancelo being the player occupying full width. We'd have Gabriel Jesus as the number 9, sometimes dropping between the lines, but often maintaining his height and pinning defenders in the defensive line, creating more space between the lines. We saw a more free role from Kevin De Bruyne, with Bernardo Silva's tendency to drop deeper. The 4-3-3 of Aston Villa maintained their compactness, and it was often the midfielders that were responsible, shifting into wide areas, which allowed Man City to utilize, overload, and isolate, or allow them to circulate the ball to get horizontal progression up the field. So now the base structure for Manchester City typically would see Bernardo Silva drop down alongside Rodri and dual width create on this right hand side with Mahrez and John Stones, and allowing then Gabriel Jesus to drop in between the lines, creating an overload in this right hand side, with Phil Foden inverting and Kevin De Bruyne switching his positioning from left to right half spaces. And what this would do is give them a lot of flexibility in their movement and allow the double pivot to then change up their structure with simple movements. We would often see either Bernardo Silva or Rodri dropping between central defenders, creating a back three and positioning the first line of build-up closer to the wide areas, or we would see Bernardo Silva drop down on the weak side to then decrease the distance to the weak side wide area when they would circulate the ball. So moving deeper now, we see Aston Villa's 4-3-3 in their mid to low block, and Manchester City continue with their dual width on this right hand side, with a very strong wide structure orientation with Kevin De Bruyne on this right side. And this is where we start to see Bernardo Silva dropping deeper into the left half space to give them more stability. We start to see them manipulating players in the first line to try and create more central space, and also to then give them a shorter distance to the weak side. So when Bernardo Silva drops into the left half space, they can often skip over the central corridor, or they can just have faster circulation and move from the central corridor into the half space, crossing each vertical channel with each passing option. Then the pass into the wide area remains shorter, allowing it to then become easier, and putting Bernardo Silva closer to more dangerous options higher up the field, whether that's the single pivot or players between the lines. And now we see Rodri dropping between central defenders, then putting them in a back three, allowing them to occupy each of the central corridors. And this is probably the one that manipulated the front three most, because changed the way Ollie Watkins would have to go and press, drawing the central forward out, because he can no longer cover the single pivot with his cover shadow because of his positioning between central defenders. So this would then decrease the distance to the wide area and allow better access to the half space. We would often then see Rodri used diagonal dribbling into the half space or central corridor to change the person responsible for pressing down the ball and manipulate the press of Aston Villa. Then in the midfield, we'd see Phil Foden come in between the lines, Bernardo Silva drop deeper, and allow them to play an off-centered midfield three with still heavy occupation between the lines and full width and height created from Gabriel Jesus and Riyad Mahrez, maintaining their structure and pinning the back line. Now we see a similar movement in possession of the ball for Manchester City, and with all these central midfield rotations and movements, manipulating the first line of build-up and the midfield position, it often left Cancelo in a more open position and Zinchenko when he would come on and give them more forward access to then players like their fullbacks using the full width and progressing the ball in the wide areas. These players then would become most dangerous and be the players that would hurt Aston Villa in the end and be the center of their goals. The wide areas would then open up with the wingers inverting like Phil Foden and Riyad Mahrez, creating more of a midfield diamond, with Riyad Mahrez making inverted and higher runs, then allowing players in the fullback positions to then get higher up the field and become more free, especially when Aston Villa would then shift with their midfield three. It would become very hard for their midfield to then shift across the whole width of the field and create access to the wide area. As we see with their 4-3-3, it becomes very compact and the space is created out wide, allowing them to advance the ball in the wide areas. With the narrow defensive structure of Aston Villa, we also see the benefit of strong wide structures from Manchester City after they would go with a midfield four, using Kevin De Bruyne through the half space, having two holding midfielders and two more advanced players, but having these players against a very narrow defensive setup from Aston Villa would allow them to circulate possession and create 2v1s in the wide area if they were able to displace the midfield of Aston Villa quickly enough. And then on the weak side, it would be a more isolated approach with Cancelo as the left fullback, creating height and an option to progress around the width of Aston Villa's defensive setup. Now, when Aston Villa were in possession of the ball and did build from the back, they would have their two central defenders split by their goalkeeper and go with a natural 4-3-3 with wide and deeper fullbacks. This would then allow them to use a midfield three to try and create third man patterns accessing the wide area. Now, Manchester City would press in a 4-2-3-1, seeing Bernardo Silva jump aggressively with Rodri as the single pivot and the wingers playing higher up the field. It would leave Gabriel Jesus and Kevin De Bruyne as the number 9 and the central attacking midfielder. Now, they would press with numbers down, but because of their intensity and use of cover shadows, this often made up for their numerical disadvantage. So when we talk about third man concepts, the most common pattern Aston Villa used was going to their number 8 and simply bouncing the ball back to Matty Cash in the wide area. This would then respond with Manchester City's fullback Cancelo jumping to use more man orientation and numerical equality at the back to then generate higher intensity and more man-oriented press right from the start of the game. That's where we're going to wrap up the analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.